Reconstruction, good night, and let there be light. I am, as always, your host, Christopher Paul Dugdale, MEDMA. We are Duncanville High School in these United States, and today is January 7th, 2021. And on this date in history, in 1918, so 103 years ago, my grandmother was born. She's dead now. But she was nice. So, guess I got that going for me. When you're talking about important pioneers in U.S. history, Victoria Woodhull is one of the ones that is really overlooked. Okay, now a lot of people tend to point the fact that she was someone who believed in free love, or the right to basically sleep with whoever you want, and for there to be no repercussions if you're a single woman and you sleep with a single man, that you shouldn't be prosecuted. She's also fighting sexual stereotypes. Now, at one point, she goes and decides to single out Henry Beecher, who was a infamous minister who taught the virtues of family, the virtues of chastity, and wrote about the fact that he'd had numerous affairs. And, he called her out basically as a slut. And she said, well, what does that make you? And so she wrinkles a lot of feathers with that. In 1872, she's going to run for president. The first woman to run for president. A lot of people said that she wasn't able to do that. And it wasn't just that she was a woman. She was about 28. But they put together enough people to put together an equal rights ballot. And she ran with Frederick Douglass as her vice presidential candidate. Now, she does not really make a dent in the election, but the very fact that she's running for office, makes her, a little bit more important, with what she does. So she's someone that should be recognized, and so Victoria Woodhull would be the first woman to run for president. Okay? So take that, Hillary, who's not in the class. And, anyway, I'm going to go ahead and keep going. I'm probably getting myself in trouble. Dang me. So, Carrie Chapman Cat, who has what I'd like to call Einstein hair, hopefully she's friendly. She took over the women's suffrage movement, and basically from Elizabeth Cady Stanton, from Susan B. Anthony, she's working much more in the West. And she's really pushing for the right to vote, and actually is successful in winning the right to vote in Wyoming. And part of the reason that they allow women to vote in Wyoming was to attract more people to the state. Because the thing is, men are kind of dumb, and I'm sorry for anyone who's, who wants to argue. Right now, you can't argue with the recording, but you can argue with me in class or via email. But, if a business is having trouble, they'll have things like ladies' night, and like ladies get in free or ladies get a free drink. And the truth is, when you go to a ladies' night, it's not what you think. You get there and normally it's just men. Women tend to avoid ladies' night because, well, they're smart, and men hear ladies' night and think, wow, there's going to be all ladies there and just me. I'm going to be the only guy who goes there. And it turns out that just about every man of that age will go down there. Instead, it's a much different type of locale. The Women's Christian Temperance Union, this is led by Frances Willard and Carrie Nation. By the way, Carrie Nation is referenced in an episode of Archer, if you watch that. I'm not telling you to watch that, by the way. There were about 300,000 members of the Women's Christian Temperance Union, also known as the WCTU. I wouldn't call it that because unless you remember what it stands for, that's not very useful. They really fought for prohibition. They wanted the 8-hour workday. They wanted to end child labor. Now, the way I have it phrased there makes it look like they love child labor, but they were against child labor. Yeah, let's make all the children unemployed. Okay? Federally inspected foods so that we don't accidentally kill ourselves. And a lot of people were dying from food that was not properly taken care of. You know, it's not like people had refrigerators back then. They wanted to institute kindergarten into schools, and they wanted uniform marriage and divorce laws, which means that it is equal for men and women. Okay? So the election of 1872. So we've already talked about one of the candidates, and you'll see that they did not even rate in the electoral vote. Okay? So you have Horace Greeley running, and I know you're looking at him going, wow, what a sexy beast he is. Okay? Really, he's one of the worst people you could possibly choose to run, especially in conservative 1872. So he's running against Ulysses S. Grant. Okay? So he runs for the Democratic Party, but his newspaper beforehand used to attack the Democrats all the time. Okay? He was an atheist, which was very unpopular in the majority Christian nation of 1872. He was a communist, which goes against the principles of the economic system of the United States. He was a free lover, and why wouldn't he be? Look at him. You know, what man or woman wouldn't want to be with him? I mean, if nothing else, the curiosity of the hair growing out from his neck out of his collar. What the crap is going on with his neck collar hair? I mean, seriously, people. He was a vegetarian. Yeah, I don't get them. I eat meat. That's what I do, you know. If a cow comes by here and he's not watching, a chomp. He's all mine. He also was a guy who bailed Jefferson Davis out of jail. And somehow he lost the election. To me, the craziest part about it is the fact that he got, 44% of the vote? That's just insane. Well, anyway. So the Panic of 1873. Ah! Okay. There was major problems with bank runs and the stock market crash. 25 railroads were not making payments on their loans. The banks were overlending. They weren't getting money back from the railroads. And thousands of businesses were going to close, and tens of thousands of people were unemployed. The people hit hardest by this were African Americans, who lost $7 million in savings. Okay, and part of the reason they lost some money wasn't because of their race, but because they'd never gone through a panic before. And, basically a bank run could happen any time just by the white people going in and withdrawing all their money. You could make, not even all the white people. If you had probably 20% of the people at a local bank during this time go in and withdraw all their money, there'd be no more money in the bank and the bank would close. And let's be honest, if you're black in 1873 and you see a bunch of white people running down the road angry and in a hurry, I don't know that you're going to join that crowd. Yeah, not to be racist. Now, the truth here is that you've probably already heard this before from me, but I do need to touch on this again, okay? So this is the election of 1876. Reconstruction was still going on at this point. There were nearly 250,000 troops in the South that were still active since the Civil War. So it's been a little bit over 11 years at this point. And in the election, you have Rutherford B. Hayes and Samuel Tilden, okay? Tilden, who had been very instrumental in taking down the Tweed Ring, from Tammany Hall, the political machine of New York. Okay, and so this election, it really looked like, didn't look like. Tilden won by about over 250,000 votes, which was quite substantial in this election. But the problem was the Electoral College was not entirely clear in a couple of states where things were kind of up for debate on who had won. And eventually what happens is they make a deal in Congress that they will give back the Democratic control of these states in exchange for the presidency. So it's kind of a under-the-table deal. So in the Compromise of 1877, Tilden loses because Hayes promises to end Reconstruction, and this is going to hurt the political rights of African Americans in the South. Okay, so now we're going to talk about not the pretty good railroad strike of 1874, not the okay railroad strike of 1904, and not the railroad strike, but we're going to talk about the Great Railroad Strike of 1877. So the railroad massively cuts wages by about 40%. And the workers will go on strike as a result of this. 80,000 workers total will go on strike, and it will stop the railroad from working in 11 different states. Violence is breaking out. Now, President Hayes orders the army to stop the strike, which leaves about 100 people dead. But the reason he does it isn't because of the plight of the workers, isn't because of management, it's because it stops the flow of the mail. Basically, if you ever want to get the president involved in a strike, stop the flow of the mail. That happened in 1877. It happens in the 1890s, and then it happens again in 1980 with airplanes when the air traffic controllers go on strike. Then Reagan will fire everyone that is an air traffic controller at that point. So Jim Crow laws, these are laws that are created in the South to keep African Americans in a condition similar to slavery. Okay, there are all types of things that are put in place to take away their political rights, their economic rights. Well, just take away everything. And there was a character that was created by a bunch of white guys in the South around a campfire one night whenever they decided to give themselves blackface, rubbing charcoal all over their face, and acting as they saw the black people acted. Okay, and they will actually go around and start performing these in theaters. This caricature of African Americans. Okay, so a group of reformers called Bourbons or Redeemers, they're trying to put as many laws into place to hurt African Americans. So they cut a bunch of budgets, especially in education in African American schools, and they also start using something called convict leasing. Basically, if you were in town and you didn't have a job, you're considered a vagrant, and then you'd be arrested and forced to basically work for the jail, and you'd go out and you might do all types of slave labor, but you're not technically a slave, you're a prisoner. Okay, and by the way, that would continue well into the 1950s. In fact, some people would even say to a certain degree it's still carried on today. The poll tax was created, and this was created to make people pay a tax to vote. Looking at the plight of African Americans, many of them didn't have money, and this was considered one way to keep them from voting. Then they come up with something called the literacy test. This starts in Mississippi, and it made it so that you couldn't vote if you unless you passed a literacy test. Now, the literacy test was one that was graded by someone who may or may not be able to read, and if you were white, you passed, and if you were black, you failed. And it didn't matter how well you answered the questions. It might have something about it, explain the Second Amendment to the state constitution, not the federal constitution, and if it's still applicable and how it applies to people that live in this town. And you might have varied questions such as this that you have to answer in paragraph form, and once again graded by someone who's illiterate who wasn't going to look at your answer anyway. The grandfather clause. This let poor white people vote if they had an ancestor that could vote in 1867. And I know what you're thinking. Well, the 15th Amendment was passed in 1868. Oh, I get it. This is just being racist. Okay, so yes, it is. Sharecropping. This is what happens to several former slaves, and this is where you would pay a portion of your crops to rent farmland. Okay, and this kept several people in constant debt, and so that generationally, you might owe debt from your grandparents or your great grandparents. Okay, So you would loan about 40 acres. That was normally the plot, and you would get somewhere around a half of the crops they pulled off their land once a harvest came. Then you would have to go and borrow tools, and this is going to be a large amount, a high percentage as well, somewhere around 10 to 15%. Okay, of what you made. Then you need to get seeds. You pay another 10 to 15%. Clothing, food for yourself, and shelter. You might pay another 10 to 15%, until you get to the point where everything you made just went to pay back for that 1 year. And as much as you think that farming is a super lucrative business where you can make a lot of money off of it, the truth is it's not as good of a. You're not going to get as rich as you think. I don't know what to tell you there. Well, anyway. Okay, so the spoils system or patronage. Okay, this is giving civil service or government jobs to winners of to supporters of the winning party. This is a policy that was put in place by Andrew Jackson in the United States and had been going for about 50 years by this point. Now, Roscoe Conklin on the right hand side or on the left hand side, he was in charge of a group called the Stalwarts. Okay, and they were in favor of giving jobs to not jobs, but jobs to supporters of the winning party. Wow, I could probably make this slide sound a little bit worse, but not worse than his haircut. What is that? He has a single curl going down the center of his forehead, and sorry, I just kept getting distracted by that and talking about this. On the right hand side, you see James G. Blaine. He was in charge of a group called the Half-Breeds, and he wanted to change the way that civil service was being done. By giving jobs based on merit instead of, who you. So in the election of 1880, you've got James Garfield running for president. Okay, he barely won, and so when he takes office, there was a man that supported him by the name of Charles Guiteau. He kind of helped, talk him up in one area, and had met Garfield once, and he wanted to be the diplomat to France. And Garfield thought that he was unbalanced and not the best guy for the job, so he turned him down, and he refused to give him that kind of position. So Charles Guiteau does what anyone who would do whenever they don't get a job. He snuck behind him up at the airport and shot him in the back about 3 times. So Garfield falls to the ground, and it's like, ow, my back hurts. This is in May, so about a month after he was elected, he gets shot in the back. So he goes under a doctor's care. Doctors check him out, see the bullet, see that the area is infected, and they will continually work on it day after day after day after day. Now, they'd poke their fingers into his back, they'd poke scissors into his back, anything to try and find the bullet, which they suspected was causing the infection. And they kept opening it up over and over again. Had Garfield lived 20 to 30 years later, he would have survived simply because doctors started washing their hands around that time period. They had this thing called, washing your hands to get rid of bacteria and other types of things. This is still a time period where some places people were using their hand for toilet paper. Okay? So they kept reinfecting Garfield's back. About 2 weeks before he died, he was telling his mom he was feeling well and he thought he was going to recover. Then suddenly he violently dies of, infections due to being shot in the back. Chester A. Arthur then becomes the president of the United States. Now, Arthur was actually at one point the collector of tariffs for the state of New York, and Hayes actually will fight to have him removed and put someone there based on merit. And this is kind of where Chester A. Arthur goes from here. He goes from being disgraced from losing his job as the tax collector of the Port of New York to nothing to the President of the United States just in 3.5 years. So as a result of Garfield's death, Congress will pass what's called the Pendleton Act. And basically what happens is government jobs will be given to employees based on exam scores, the civil service exam. And they still do this even to this day. So if you're trying to get a job working for the post office, you will have to take the civil service exam in order to do that. So this gets rid of a lot of the corruption, but a lot of people have some major problems with this. But the truth is, this is a way of curbing some of the problems that had been there before. So the slaughterhouse cases is one of the stranger things to come out of this time period. The 14th Amendment was pretty clear that it would protect the civil rights of African Americans, equal treatment before the law, but and that African Americans were citizens. But somehow when the Supreme Court went to look at these slaughterhouse cases, they determined that the 14th Amendment was meant more to protect corporations and their trading rights than it was African Americans, and that African Americans would have to turn to the states to enforce civil rights. Now, I know you're thinking, all those things you just said don't make sense. And you know what that tells me, the fact that you're saying that, you were listening. You know, I have no explanation for how this is how they read the 14th Amendment, other than the fact that it does a lot to protect the rights of corporations. You know, so many times corporations are the ones that are really hurt, you know, and it's not the people trying to feed their family, it's them. They're trying to protect their investors. You know, the real people who've suffered. I don't know. I can't explain this. If you're looking for an explanation for this, I'm not your man. I'm sorry. It's ridiculous. Okay, so Alexander Graham Bell. He invented the telephone, okay? So he made a phone call to Watson. He told Watson to come here. So it's basically kind of how we use our phones today. Whenever I call my kids to tell them, hey, we're eating, come on down. And they come down, they're like, you're so lazy, why don't you just come up and get me? And I'll say, hey, why don't you say that to my face? And then we get into a shoving match, and then the gun goes off, and it's like, oh no. One of my favorite things about Alexander Graham Bell is he answered the phone, ahoy. That's kind of amusing to me. The company he started is still around today. It's called the American Telephone and Telegraph Company, also known as AT&T. And if you don't believe me, you can Google it or look for it on Yahoo or Bing or whatever annoying search engine that you're using. Netscape, you know. Anyway, Ask Jeeves. Yeah, those are ones that you've never seen. They were gone about the time you were born. Now, okay, here, let me try that again. There we go. Thomas Edison invented the phonograph, okay? So basically the record player. You know how you can listen to things more than once? You can thank Thomas Edison for that. You know how you have a light bulb whenever the light turns on? You know, you're like, let there be light, and then light comes on. Yeah, if we didn't have the light bulb, you'd have to watch TV in the dark. Wait, isn't that powered by light also? Dang it. Dang you, Thomas Edison. We need you for several different things. He made the first dictaphone. That's where you could actually record your voice. He made the electronic generator. This is so you can create power. He also did motion pictures. If you've ever watched the first movie ever, it's pretty riveting. It's a man sneezing. You can watch it on YouTube. It lasts about 3 seconds. He also created the first electric company and supplied New York City with its power. The truth is, his family still owns a certain extent of it. It's called Consolidated Edison. So, if you're ever up in the New York area and you're like turning on the light and you're like, wow, this power is pretty cool. Well, you can talk to Thomas Edison, the sexy man that you see before you. So, anyway, that's Thomas Edison. By the way, he had more patents than anyone else in U.S. history, and he actually is going to steal a lot of patents from people. People wanted to get hired by him, and while they're doing the presentation, he would have his people watching to reverse engineer what they were making and file a patent on it before they could. Yeah. James J. Hill. He built the Great Northern Railroad without federal land grants. And unlike several other people that were building transcontinental railroads, his was the only railroad that did not go bankrupt. Okay? It was still around for quite some time. Now let's talk about someone who's fun. And that fun guy is a man by the name of Cornelius Vanderbilt. Look at the sideburns that he has. You can tell how rich he is by how ridiculous his sideburns are. Okay? Basically, he has these big cones coming off both sides of his face. No hair on his chin, no hair on his neck, just ridiculous sideburns. Okay? He combined several New England railroads into one company, and this was mainly for transportation, and he makes well over $100 million, and he will be the person who starts Vanderbilt University, where one of my favorite former students is in attendance. Now, what you see here is very high voter turnout. Okay, much higher than the last election. Okay, from 1876 to 1900, over 70% of the population are voting. Okay, which is something we still don't see today. Okay, it was about 60 or 65 in this last election. So, if you're happy with the way the election turned out, imagine another 10 to 15 million people voting. That could have made a major difference, one way or the other. But, here we are on Earth. I don't know where I'm going with that, but that sure sounded strange. Okay, so you have two really defined voting blocks. You have the Democrats. So you have, by the way, this is something I haven't brought up, but basically from 1865 to 1965, the Democratic Party and the KKK are the same thing. Okay? Many times they would run fundraisers together. A lot of times what they were trying to do was maintain white supremacy in the South. Okay? They will also include Catholics, which, depending on how extreme of racist you were at that time, you wouldn't have liked Catholics. Okay, that was a pretty Protestant thing to do, especially as a white supremacist. Recent immigrants like Jews, which they also didn't like. The urban working poor, so these are the poor people of the nation. They were people that flocked to the Democratic Party, and most of the farmers. Okay, on the other side of the aisle, you have the Republicans, and they're led by northern whites, so some people with some money, African Americans because of Lincoln freeing the slaves, northern Protestants, the more of the nativists are in the South, Old Wasp. A WASP is a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant, okay, and most of the middle class. Okay, so it's not 100%, but it's pretty close to being divided between these two groups. The American Railway Association. Okay, have you ever noticed how we've had time zones? Well, the whole reason that they created time zones and standardized time was because of the railroad and making sure it was on time and making sure that whenever you had something going on, you knew how to get there on time. Before this, you don't have standardized time. In fact, the time is going to vary from city to city based on where you are at any point. And basically, they would set noon by the time of the day where an object would have no shadows. because the sun would be directly overhead, and that's how they would set their clocks by that time. And the truth is, from one town to the next, about 20 miles in difference, you'll have a major difference, and it might be 2 to 3 or even 4 minutes, from the other city, or it could be even, worse than that. So they decided along these regions to set one single time, and that all starts in 1883. Okay, and then the 1884 election. Okay, uh, basically, Republicans had done such a bad job. They have these songs going back and forth to try and pick on the different candidates. They had James G. Blaine, Continental Liar from the state of Maine, and the Republicans came back against Grover Cleveland because he had an illegitimate child, screaming out, "Ma, Ma, where's my paw?" And Cleveland and his men replied, "Going to the White House, ha ha ha." So James G. Blaine was seen as so corrupt that a group of Republicans started to support Cleveland. They were called the Mugwumps, and they did this because Blaine was corrupt. Now, Cleveland, on the other hand, a man in his late 40s, he had an illegitimate child, and when people came up and they questioned him about it, and you have to understand, if you had an illegitimate child at this time, you were seen as a man that you couldn't trust, and the child was seen as trash. You don't raise that person, you don't have anything to associate with them. Okay, so whenever he was asked, do you have a child out of wedlock, and he said, "Yes, I do, and I'm very proud of him. I'm proud to be his father. He is a beautiful and brilliant young man, and I'm glad to have him in my life." And people had a hard time saying against that. In fact, for a few times you might hear people go, "Aww," but because of that, he was a pretty straight shooter. Now, he is the first Democratic president since Buchanan. So that has been Buchanan was elected in 1856. Okay. Now I know you're thinking Andrew Johnson, but remember, Andrew Johnson was not elected to the presidency. He was just kind of tagging along with Lincoln. Okay. He also is the only president to serve non-consecutive terms, which means that he was elected in 1884 and in 1892. So he has a 4-year gap there in the middle where even though he wins the popular vote, he will lose the Electoral College. Okay? Also, Grover Cleveland had another secret. Okay? He had been dating a girl for about 4 years, and once he becomes president, he gets married to this 21-year-old girl who he started dating whenever he was 46 and she was 17. They have a baby together, Cleveland and his wife, and they name her Ruth. Okay? And Hershey's, once upon hearing the name of his child, creates a new candy bar named after her called Baby Ruth. Now, for anyone who's thinking, oh, is that after Babe Ruth, the baseball player? No. Babe Ruth, the baseball player, was called Babe, and he was a 300-pound man. No one called him Baby, except maybe his girlfriend/mom. I know, I made that weird. Okay, so this leads us to the end of yet another day. Corruption everywhere, not the kind of world you want to live in. Kind of sounds like today, except no internet. So don't COVID, don't cocaine, don't AIDS. Make good decisions, and be safe, but don't be a safe. And I will talk to you again here. Have a great day.